One thing I forgot to mention in the previous presentation, pointed out by my good lady wife, was that when the SBS and the SBS in particular were operating in those islands, mainland and so forth, apart from having the silk maps wrapped around their waist and the dagger in their right leg or left leg, they also were issued with gold sovereigns. And the reason being because, as we all know, currencies change from place to place. You know, you go to one country and in those days the currency is worth something and then the next minute it's not. Good example of that is the end of World War II when Germany was more or less flattened and they had Deutsche Marks, and you know, you had to have a barrow load of Deutsche Marks to go and buy a loaf. But gold's always been a fairly consistent value, recognised by everybody. So they were actually issued with gold for negotiating with whoever they had to get whatever things they might need. And that's why I just want to mention it. Right, so this next one is 25 years after World War II, and having listened to my dad's stories about what he did, travelling up and down to London and so on, when we worked there, I was inspired to join the parachute regiment initially, and then later do a selection course for SAS. So I thought I'd just go through a few things here to do with airborne, planes, parachutes and so on, because you guys are all pilots, flyers. You're more inclined to be interested in things to do with the air than amphibious. So in those days, when we first joined the parachute regiment, money in the UK was not a lot of it. So we had to think of ways of getting parachuting in without necessarily using planes. So what they used to use is barrage balloons, which had been used during the war to deflect German bombers and so on, were now being used to connect to a thing called a cage underneath on the ground there, and then we would use that like this to go up. So on the ground there would be an RAF truck with a winch, and the winch would have a metal cable going to that cage. The cage is suspended beneath the balloon. You go up to 800 feet. When you got to 800 feet, the thing would be swinging about 360 degrees. You know? There'd be 5 of you in it, one of them being a dispatcher. And then you'd be standing there, just have one single bar across the edge of the cage, and then you'd lift it up and say, right, who's first? And then someone, usually the one standing by the gap, by the gate, would step forward, and then, because it was all what they call static line parachuting, so in other words, they we all had a main parachute, reserve parachute, and out the back of the parachute was a strop, and that would attach to the inside of the cage. So as you jumped out, it would pull out the bag off the top of the chute, and then the chute would inflate, and then you come down. The only thing is you'd have about a 150-foot drop before the thing would open. So I used to say you'd end up with a ring in your mouth. When we went from balloon jumping, we started then, in those days, before the days of the C-130, they were still using British aircraft, and many of you may recognise some of these old aircraft. The Blackburn Beverley was a typical example of where we were doing port or starboard side exit parachuting. Also used the Hastings, which was another aircraft used at that time, same sort of thing. And then the C-130 came in around about the mid-late 60s, and the options there where you could either go port or starboard, in other words, side exit, or you could have a boom exit. Boom exit being when the back of the aircraft, as you would know, lifted up, and either parachutists or heavy equipment like dropping Land Rovers or supplies like they do in Gaza and so on, would be dropped out from the boom rather than from the side. Apart from that, we also used helicopters. This particular one was one that was used right up until the mid-70s, called the Wessex helicopter. It was actually this particular one was part of the Fleet Air Arm. The Fleet Air Arm was aircraft used by the Navy but in combined operations with the army. So, for example, when we were in Germany, like this one here, we were using Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm Wessex helicopters to be ferried from place to place. That was in the parachute regiment. In the SAS, it was different. We had either jumping from aircraft or from helicopters. Usually the difference was as well that we were jumping, in the SAS, we're jumping in small groups of 4 at night, whereas in the parachute regiment there'd be sticks of 30, and it would usually be daytime, because the role was different for both regiments. So in the scout heli, if we weren't parachuting, we were being flown at treetop level into clearings in forests or whatever, and the scout helicopter was the one that was used. With the doors taken off, we'd be sitting on the side, probably like you've seen in some of the shots of Vietnam. You know, we see the guys being dropped in by Iroquois into the jungles of Vietnam, that type of thing. So we'd be sitting with our feet on the skids, holding onto our weapon, Bergen rucksack on the back, and then we'd come into the clearing and either abseil down or jump off, and off would go the scout. In the background on this one, there's 2 aircraft. One is, I think in the foreground is the C-130, and in the background is the Argosy, which was still being used. That's another older aircraft. And these are paras coming back from, we did a jump into Holland, a place called Ginkle Heath, which was the original dropping zone for the Arnhem Operation Market Garden. It was a commemorative jump we did there, and we flew from RAF Northolt to Ginkle Heath. This is when I was doing a jump. I'm on the left there. That was in West Germany, very cold winter, jumping in the snow on the borders of East Germany. That was the headquarters of 22 SAS Regiment in Hereford. This was, I took this in mid-air actually. When I exited from the C-130, I had what they call a Denison smock done up to about here, and I had a Brownie camera stuffed inside here. And as soon as I came out of the aircraft, unzipped it, took the camera out, and I thought, click, click, and I got this one. What happened, I hadn't been concentrating enough on what I was doing. As you can see, that dropping zone is pretty clear. Mostly flat ground and field. But yours truly hadn't taken enough time to steer the chute, and my chute turned through 180 degrees, and I got blown into that wood down there and landed in a tree. This one was, again, back in the Paras. We were doing a NATO exercise in West Germany. We were using anti-tank weapons here called a 106 recoilless, mounted on a Land Rover, because the fear was always that the Soviet troops would come across the border and they literally could roll over West Germany within a week. And they would have been up in the Calais area, and the next thing would be across the channel, you know. So the British armies and Americans and French and so on had different areas on West Germany where we were supposed to defend in the event of the Russians coming in. And this was actually the year when Russia invaded Czechoslovakia, invaded and occupied them, 1968. We also did military ski training in Norway. We did some training in the southwest of France with the French Foreign Legion and other troops down there. And that was in an area called the Coast, C-O-U-S-S-E-S, Coast de l'Arzac. It's a very mountainous area in southwest France, and we had a long, grueling 2 weeks of doing things all around the mountains there. And this was the final rendezvous where we finished up, and we're pretty glad to see the back of it. That's just a little bit of fun, pretending to chopping up somebody in Denmark. We're not. Oh, this one was again in the same area. We did an ambush on a British armoured car column, and then we were bugging out afterwards. This is actually a better one I took of jumping into Arnhem. And as you can see in the very far distance, there is the C-130 disappearing away, and all the other the stick is coming down into the DZ. Back in Germany again, and we were doing some anti-tank firing using a thing called a Carl Gustaf, which is a Swedish-made shoulder-held anti-tank weapon with a rocket on it. Bit like what the old-fashioned bazooka, but more effective. And this one was taken in a C-130, coming in to do an exercise with the Danish army. We were actually the enemy on this one, jumping in at night, early hours of the morning, and the Danish army had dogs and police and all kinds of stuff looking for us. And if we got caught, we were going, we'd be interrogated and so on, and given a bad time. But most of us managed not to be caught, which was good. Jumping by a fjord, by the way, is a bit dodgy at night as well, because even if you're jumping in groups of 4, you may end up in the drink. And so we're all fitted with these things called Mae West, inflatables. And unfortunately, when they're being fitted, and you have your parachute gear on as well, you're tightening your harness up. Sometimes some of the guys will accidentally pull the other cord, which is the Mae West, and they end up with like this, walking around like this for a few hours. This was doing some combat survival, i.e. Skinning rabbits, hunting, fishing for trout and so forth, putting your hand under the water and feeling along the riverbank. Then after all that, when I came to Australia, I did some sport parachuting, and I was in Wilton in New South Wales, and we used to jump out of, one of the planes was a Cessna 182. That's me standing by the Cessna. That's when I was doing free falling, taken of the dropping zone on the airstrip in Wilton in those days. And then years later, when back in the UK, and I did a gliding course in that particular glider, and another one called a Falke, F-A-L-K-E, which was a motorised one. And the last thing I've did in the way of parachuting was with the SAS here. We did a jump into the Indian Ocean, about halfway between Fremantle and Rottnest Island. We were able to see whales swimming around in the distance. So that was quite deep, you see. And that concludes that. Thank you very much.